Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Metals Company's channel, developing the world's largest estimated resource of metals required for the electric vehicle and low carbon energy future. Joining to discuss, to give us a high level overview of the company, a little bit of its history and some milestone expectations, we have Craig, the Chief Financial Officer, joining us. Welcome, sir.
Hey Kyle, it's a pleasure to be here.
A pleasure to get you on. So, you guys are in a fascinating industry here. For newer audiences, do you want to kind of just give us that broad overview, kind of that elevator pitch? What exactly is going on there at the Metals Company?
Yeah, we are developing the world's largest estimated source of battery metals, as you noted, specifically a resource full of nickel, copper, cobalt, and manganese. Think of it as four mines rolled into one. And it's through this very special resource. It's known as polymetallic nodules. I actually hold the nodule right here in my hand. This was taken from 4,000 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. There's literally fields that have trillions and trillions of these polymetallic nodules in the abyssal zone of the Pacific. So it's very deep, it's very dark. That means that there's a limited amount of plant life, a limited amount of, or excuse me, no plant life, and a limited amount of animal life. And it's actually the best place one could locate a resource that has such high grades of the materials needed for the world to decarbonize. So this is a resource that is estimated at 1.6 billion tons in TMC's Canadian and SEC compliant resource statements. So it's coming at the right time. The world needs it. And there's been a lot on the geopolitical front as this industry marches closer to production. And TMC expects to be in production roughly 2 years from now. It's a really good time to be developing a resource this big, this high grade, this low impact, and frankly, this economic.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the insight. So I guess the question here is if you guys are kind of heading to production in the next couple of years, what can we kind of expect out of 2024? If there's one thing that's worth focusing on, are you guys kind of getting into some, I'm not sure how the drill results work from, under the water there, but maybe give us some insight on to what we should be paying attention to.
Well, look, one of the great things about this resource is it's sitting unattached on top of the seafloor. So there is actually no drilling, there's no digging, there's no blasting, there's no deforestation, there's no tailings, there's nearly zero solid waste, and there's a roughly 94% reduction in CO2 emissions per ton of nickel, for example, versus some of the rainforest nickel that is dominating that market right now. So we are really the major antidote to supply battery metals that were otherwise controlled by Chinese sources, whether that's DRC, cobalt, or whether that's Indonesian nickel funded by China with guaranteed offtake to China. So we've actually done a lot of the de-risking on this project. This is a company that's been around for about 13 years, and we've spent most of that time defining the size of the resource, sampling it, providing technical reports on the size and grade and quality of the resource, doing environmental impact work. All of that's really been done, and we're putting the finishing touches on our environmental impact statement. But we've already spent around $500 million improving this ground and getting it ready for production. So TMC in late 2022 did a successful test mining campaign where we collected 4,500 tons of those polymetallic nodules, like I showed you, and lifted 3,000 tons of those nodules to the surface. So that's the first time anyone's done that since the 1970s. But this is an industry that almost got started in the 1970s by the likes of BP, Shell, Lockheed Martin, Sumitomo, Mitsubishi, US Steel. The problem is there wasn't any agreement on who owned the oceans because this occurs in international waters. So what to look out for in 2024 in terms of catalysts? There's going to be a lot that TMC controls in terms of delivering our environmental impact statement around the middle of this year, delivering our pre-feasibility work around the middle of this year, and launching the first ever application for the international water mining of deep sea nodules in the second half of this year, following the July 2024 session of the regulator. So those are the milestones for TMC. You should also keep an eye on some of the milestones more worldwide in terms of the geopolitics of this issue. China is pushing ahead strongly for deep sea mining in international waters. They have 5 contracts in international waters, and TMC is actually the furthest along of any contractor, and we expect to have at least a 5-year head start on anybody doing this commercially. So we control very good ground in a very good neighborhood that is littered with these nodules just sitting on the seafloor waiting to get picked up. And really, as China has moved to make this a political priority, that's drawn out responses from the United States. For example, there are headlines just yesterday where the US House released a bill on how the US needs to financially support and provide diplomatic support for those companies and allied parties trying to collect, process, and refine these polymetallic nodules. Further, you actually had just now 331 signatories on a letter from former military leaders, intelligence communities, secretaries of state, secretaries of defense. Hillary Clinton was one of the signatories to it. All of these former dignitaries writing to the US government saying the US needs to ratify the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. The US needs to get access to this resource. So really the catalysts here are driven by what TMC controls, but also there are very, very strong geopolitical tailwinds that are blowing in our favor. And one last example would be Norway. Norway announced in early January of this year that they're opening up their territorial waters to deep sea exploration and then pending environmental work, deep sea exploitation. So China is doing it. The US wants to do it. India's doing it. Japan's doing it. Norway's doing it. Some of the biggest, most credible industrial countries in the world see this as the way forward and a matter of national security. And TMC is bringing on this project at the right time in terms of the geopolitics.
It almost sounds like the space race in an industry that people probably largely misunderstand. But I
have to comment on that. That's a great analogy because China wants to dominate deep space and the deep sea. They have, I think they have three deeps. One of them is deep data as well. But China views this very much like, we would view the space race 50 years ago. And there was a Washington Post article in October of 2023 noting that TMC is ahead in that race. But China is trying to catch up. And frankly, a lot of the technology that China is developing in terms of the observation of the seafloor, the Washington Post piece noted a lot of it could be used for underwater military exercises. So there is definitely a national defense angle to this.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the insight, and I'll pass it off to the viewers. We'd love to know what you think in that comment section below. And consider subscribing because when news and catalysts continue to come down the wire, of course, we're going to bring it to you here. But on that note, as always, we look forward to catching you in the next one.